What happens when a 75-year-old woman dares to feel alive again, and her own family calls it inappropriate? The way she responds to the humiliation changes everything in the most unexpected way. They say after 70, you're supposed to disappear politely. Keep your voice down. Stop wearing red lipstick. Don't talk about your feelings. And by all means, God forbid you even think about intimacy. Because, apparently, wanting to feel close to someone, skin, soul, breath, is inappropriate after your hair goes white. Well, I've had white hair for 15 years, and I still remember the exact moment I realized the world decided I was invisible. It happened in aisle 5 of the drugstore, of all places, where I was looking for a bottle of vitamin D and instead found a wall of feminine hygiene products locked behind glass, like they were diamonds or contraband. I asked a young store clerk for help unlocking it, and he looked at me like I'd asked for fireworks and tequila. "You need that?" He blinked. "Not for decoration," I said. I wasn't planning to knit with it. That's when it hit me. I wasn't supposed to need anything like that anymore. Because old women don't have bodies, just creaking joints and thick stockings. We're supposed to tend to the grandkids and die quietly in our sleep. No passion, no desire, no intimacy. But I'll tell you this right now. They're wrong. Dead wrong. And the worst part? It wasn't the world that hurt me the most. It was my own family. It started 3 months ago. I had just done something I hadn't done in a long, long time. I bought myself a dress. A red one. Not because I had a date. Not because I was trying to look young. But because I looked in the mirror that morning, saw the same beige cardigan and elastic waist pants I'd been wearing for 20 years, and thought, when did I start dressing like a couch? So I walked into that consignment shop on Maple Avenue, tried on the red dress, and for the first time in years, I felt alive. Not young, not foolish, just present. I wore it to Sunday dinner with my daughter's family. That's when the trouble began. My son-in-law, Mitch, who's about as expressive as a doorstop and half as warm, looked up from his mashed potatoes, did a double take, and said, "Wow, Ruth, going somewhere after this?" "No," I smiled. "I just felt like wearing something bold." My daughter Susan barely looked at me. Her lips twitched in that tight, controlled smile she gives when she disapproves but doesn't want to seem rude. "It's nice," she said. "Just unexpected." Unexpected. That was her code for too much, and things only got worse from there. Later that week, I was sitting in my backyard, tending to my little rose bush, the one my late husband planted before his stroke, when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Susan. "Hey, just checking. Everything okay lately? You've been acting different." Different? What did she mean by different? That I dared to show a pulse? That I finally wore something besides taupe? I replied, "I'm fine. Just trying new things. Is that a problem?" Her reply came back too fast. "No, of course not. Just don't want you to push yourself or be influenced by anything weird online or something." Weird online? What did she think I was doing? Joining a dating site for circus clowns? But then came the real kick in the ribs. That weekend, she invited me over and had a printed pamphlet waiting. A literal pamphlet, folded into thirds, glossy. It was titled, "Aging with Grace: Why Accepting Your Phase of Life is Healthy." I wish I were making that up. Now, let me make something clear. I'm not out here trying to relive prom night. I don't want to squeeze into skinny jeans or take salsa lessons, though maybe I should. But the moment I put on that red dress, something shifted in me, and they didn't like it. They liked me quiet, predictable. The sweet, doting grandma who bakes cookies, offers tissues, and watches crime shows at 6 p.m. But I was lonely. And not the wish someone would call me kind of lonely. The empty bed, empty heart, nobody's hugged me in months kind of lonely. So I joined a book club. And guess what? It wasn't just books we were reading. There was a man there. His name was Franklin. He was 74, widowed, with a voice like velvet and eyes that saw through nonsense like X-rays. And when we spoke, I felt like me again. Not a relic, not a helper, not a burden. Just a woman. We started meeting for walks, then coffee. Then one day, he put his hand on mine and I didn't pull away. I told Susan about him. That's when all hell broke loose. She came to my house the next morning, unannounced, storming in like the morality police. She sat me down on the couch and said, "Mom, what are you doing?" "I'm seeing someone," I said, "and I'm not ashamed of it." "You're 75, she hissed. "And alive," I replied. "But intimacy at your age? Isn't that dangerous?" I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was insane. The same daughter who once marched for women's rights, who taught her kids to express their emotions, was now acting like physical closeness after 70 was criminal behavior. I asked her, "Would you say the same if I was just making new friends?" She didn't answer, just stared at the floor, jaw clenched. That silence said everything. From that day on, I noticed a shift. Calls got shorter. The grandkids didn't visit as much. Mitch avoided eye contact altogether. One day, I heard him mutter, "This whole thing is just weird," under his breath when I walked into the room. Weird? What's weird is that society would rather pretend people like me stop existing emotionally the day our hair goes gray. We don't. I'm not dead. I'm not invisible. And I sure as hell don't need permission to feel. We're just getting started. But believe me, what happens next? It gets even more intense. Stay tuned to see what unfolds when a woman refuses to apologize for being fully alive. You ever notice how people start speaking louder around you once you pass 70? As if losing muscle mass means your ears fell off too. Or how they switch to that syrupy tone. You know the one, like you're a confused puppy or a malfunctioning microwave. "Hey, Ruth," they say, dragging out your name like molasses. "Are you sure you want to eat all that salt?" Let me be clear. My blood pressure's fine. What isn't fine? The way people treat aging like a disease. Like dignity has an expiration date printed on your driver's license. Anyway, things with Franklin were going just fine. No, better than fine. He made me laugh. He held my hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. For the first time in years, I didn't flinch when someone touched me. You ever go so long without being touched that a hug feels like medicine? But the more I smiled, the more my family frowned. It started subtly. Susan forgot to invite me to her youngest daughter's piano recital. Mitch assumed I was busy when he brought the grandkids to the lake. I'd call and get voicemail, again and again and again. So one day I confronted her. I walked into her kitchen, the shrine to Pinterest perfection, with lemon-scented candles and jars labeled quinoa, and said, "Is there something you want to say to me, Susan?" She looked startled, but only for a second. Then she folded a dish towel like she was preparing for battle and said, "I just think this whole thing is concerning." "What whole thing?" "You. This man. Franklin." "This man," I repeated, like she'd just said, "that lizard you picked up from the swamp." Her arms crossed. "Mom, be honest. Do you really think it's appropriate?" There it was. The word. Appropriate. as if the intimacy police had issued a rule book and I'd missed the deadline to sign up for celibacy. "Let me ask you something," I said, my voice sharper than a paring knife. "When was the last time you asked me if I was happy? Not busy, not helpful, not functioning, happy." She blinked, opened her mouth, closed it. I wasn't done. "You didn't flinch when I buried my husband alone during lockdown. You didn't question it when I started skipping dinner. But God forbid I find someone who makes me feel something again. Suddenly, you're worried I've lost my mind?" To her credit, Susan didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just said the one thing I didn't expect. "You're embarrassing yourself." And that was the moment something in me cracked. Not broke, not shattered. Cracked. And light started pouring through. The next week, I showed up to my book club in a silk blouse and lipstick the color of cranberry. Franklin gave me a grin that could melt butter and said, "Ruth, you look like Saturday night in Manhattan." And I did. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I'd decided I wasn't going to fold up and disappear quietly just to make other people more comfortable. But then came the letter. Yep, a letter. Typed. Formal. Delivered by mail like I was being summoned to a court hearing. It was from Susan, and it began with, "Dear Mom, I'm writing this instead of calling because I want to avoid escalating things further. I'll spare you the full script." The highlights included, "I'm worried about your judgment. This relationship might not be in your best interest. What kind of example are you setting for the grandkids?" The grandkids. That one burned. I'd taught them how to bake banana bread. I'd driven them to ballet when Susan had the flu. I'd been the one wiping tears when they scraped their knees. But apparently, holding a man's hand made me a threat to their moral compass. I took that letter, folded it, and tucked it into my purse. Not out of shame, but out of something far more dangerous. Resolve. A few days later, I got a text from Franklin. "Lunch on Sunday? My treat. Burgers and rebellion." I laughed out loud, not because it was funny, but because it was freeing. That Sunday, we walked into Joe's Diner, a little greasy spoon with booths that stuck to your thighs in summer, and sat like any other couple, except people stared. Not because we were loud or rude or inappropriate, because we were old and smiling. The waitress called me "sweetie" in a tone so condescending I thought I might choke on my coffee. When Franklin asked her if the burger came medium rare, she said, "Oh, honey, we can make it soft if you have teeth issues." I nearly dropped my fork. Franklin winked at me. "That's okay, darling. We still chew just fine." And that's when I saw it. The exact same look in the waitress's eyes that Susan had given me weeks ago. Pity. But not the kind you get when something tragic happens. This was the pity of irrelevance, of being old and daring to act human. That night, Franklin kissed me on the cheek. Not dramatic, not passionate, just tender. And you know what I felt? Gratitude. Not just for him, for myself, for not giving up on the idea that life doesn't end when your kids think it should. That closeness, love, and even desire. Yes, desire. Don't vanish when you start collecting Social Security. They evolve, they deepen, and they sure as hell don't require permission. This is the turning point. Everything you've been waiting for is right here. Stay tuned to see how a woman reclaims her voice and forces everyone to listen. There's a peculiar kind of silence that creeps into your life when you've been soft-canceled by your own family. Not cut off outright. Oh no, that would be too honest, too loud. Instead, you're gradually ushered into the quiet corner of their lives, like a coat they're too polite to throw away, but too embarrassed to wear. Calls turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. And then came the Sunday dinners I must have just forgotten to be invited to. Franklin noticed. Of course he did. "You're quieter," he said one evening as we sipped tea on his back porch, the cicadas humming like tiny engines in the dark. "That sharp edge of yours, where'd it go?" I forced a smile. "Maybe I left it in the mailbox, right next to Susan's latest friendly concern." He didn't press. He never did. That was the thing about Franklin. He didn't try to fix me. He didn't tiptoe around my age or talk to me like I was a fragile antique about to crack. He just saw me. And after 75 years of being typecast as the caregiver, the grandma, the soft-spoken neighbor with good pies and low expectations, being seen felt revolutionary. It was around this time that I stopped being afraid of my own reflection. Not because I suddenly looked younger. Trust me, I didn't. The wrinkles were still there. My hands still trembled when I poured coffee, and my knees still sounded like popcorn every time I stood up. But there was something new behind my eyes. Conviction. The kind you only earn after you've been told one too many times to act your age. So I did something bold. Some might even call it reckless, though I'd argue that reclaiming your dignity is the opposite of reckless. I signed us up for a weekend couples retreat. Yes, that kind. No, not the one with matching tracksuits and bingo games. This was a wellness retreat for renewing emotional and physical intimacy, the kind usually filled with couples in their 40s who complain about screen time and sleeping in separate beds. But I figured if anyone had earned the right to renew something, it was us. I told Franklin, expecting hesitation. He smiled like I'd just handed him the last piece of birthday cake. We drove upstate, 2 hours, winding through tree-lined roads, talking about everything from 1960s jazz to bad casseroles to the time he accidentally crashed a boat into a dock and lied about it for 3 years. When we arrived, the receptionist blinked at us like we were ghosts. "Are you here for the retreat?" "No," I said. "We're here for the demolition derby. Thought this was the pit stop." Franklin chuckled. The poor girl turned red. We entered the welcome circle. 10 couples seated on meditation cushions, a scented candle burning between us. One of the instructors, a young woman with unnervingly smooth skin, welcomed us with that precious tone reserved for people she assumed didn't know how phones work. "We honor your courage," she said to us. Courage? For showing up? For not dying in our armchairs? I leaned toward Franklin and whispered, "I didn't realize walking into a room was a hero's journey." But then something surprising happened. As we shared, slowly, awkwardly at first, the tone shifted. We weren't the only ones starved for connection. We weren't even the oldest. One couple had been married 52 years and hadn't held hands since Clinton was in office. By day 2, people stopped staring at us like relics and started listening. Really listening. Franklin spoke about losing his wife. I spoke about losing my place in my own family. We both talked about how touch had become foreign, how a hug could still crack something open that we thought had been sealed shut for decades. When I told the room that intimacy at our age wasn't about lust, but about presence, something rippled across those faces. Empathy. Recognition. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like an outlier. I felt like a mirror. When we got home, Susan was waiting for me in my kitchen. That's never a good sign. She was sitting stiffly at the table, her purse clutched like a hostage. No hello, no, how was your weekend? Just this. You need to stop. I blinked. Stop what? All of it. Franklin, these retreats. You're embarrassing yourself. And us. I could have snapped. I could have cried, but I didn't. I sat down slowly, looked her in the eye, and said the most dangerous thing I've said in my life. No. Just that. No apologies, no explanations, no sugar to coat her discomfort. She leaned forward, her voice sharp. People are talking. Let them, I said. Maybe they'll learn something. You're not thinking clearly. This is about respect. No, Susan. This is about control. You don't get to shrink me into the version of mother you're comfortable with just because I make you uncomfortable as a woman. Boom. There it was. Her face flushed, her mouth opened, closed. Then, silence. And in that silence, I felt the crack inside me widen. Not with damage, but with truth. I stood up, walked to the fridge, poured myself a glass of water. Calm. Clear. Then I said, "You've spent so long trying to protect your children from the idea that aging doesn't sterilize us, that you've forgotten to protect your mother from being erased." She didn't respond. Didn't have to. The words sat in the room like thunder. That night, I sat on the porch alone, Franklin away, visiting his sister. I thought about all the ways the world had told me to shrink, to be grateful for scraps of attention, to trade my longing for safety. And then I remembered something one of the retreat instructors said: "You can't shame what's already awake." Damn right. I was awake. Finally. Not just to intimacy, but to ownership of my life, my body, my right to feel. This is the fire, the part where everything breaks open. But the final reckoning, the part you don't expect, that's still ahead. Stay for part 4. It all comes to a head, and no one walks away unchanged. There's a strange moment, somewhere between defiance and peace, when you stop asking for permission to exist fully. It doesn't come with fireworks. There's no crowd cheering, no slow piano swelling in the background like in those sentimental commercials. It happens in the quiet, in the mirror, in the way you stand up a little taller, in a room full of people who expect you to shrink. That's what I felt the morning after my final showdown with Susan. No drama, no regret, just clarity. That calm, radiant clarity that only shows up once you've burned through every last ounce of self-doubt and decided, unapologetically, I deserve to live too. I went about my week like usual. Grocery run, laundry, checked in on my neighbor Doris and her failing rosebush, even baked a coffee cake for my book club. A real one, not the gluten-free, flavorless sponge everyone's pretending to like these days. And then Sunday came. The day I used to spend surrounded by family, half listening to football and pretending to enjoy Mitch's dry meatloaf. This time, it was just me and Franklin. He brought tulips, not because it was a special day, but because you looked like you needed something loud and alive on your table. We sat down to lunch, and just as I was about to pour the tea, the doorbell rang. It was my granddaughter, Emily, 12 years old. Freckles like her mother, holding a crumpled envelope and looking like she'd just sprinted from the schoolyard. "I came by myself," she said breathlessly. "I wanted to talk to you." We sat in the living room, her legs swinging off the edge of the couch, mine stiff from too many hours on the porch swing this week. She handed me the envelope. Inside was a drawing. Me and Franklin, sitting on a bench under a tree. She'd drawn us smiling, holding hands. "I saw the picture Mom took at your retreat," she said. "You looked happy." I blinked hard. I was. I want to be like you when I'm old. Now, if you think I didn't cry, you're out of your mind. But I didn't weep because I was sad. I cried because for the first time, someone in my family didn't just tolerate me. They saw me. and not as the frail matriarch or the moral cautionary tale. Just me. The next Sunday, I went to their house. I wasn't invited. I didn't need to be. I walked in with lemon bars and a spine made of steel. Susan opened the door. Her face told me she wasn't ready, but I was. "Don't worry," I said. "I'm not here to argue." She nodded, tense. "I just wanted you to know something," I continued. "You don't have to approve of my life. You don't even have to understand it. But you don't get to rewrite it." She opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. "I raised you to be strong, independent, fierce. Don't insult that by asking me to be small." And then, I kid you not, she said the 5 most unexpected words I've heard from her since she was 12. I might have been too harsh. That's it. No grand apology. No movie-worthy hug. Just that half-sentence, offered like a peace treaty between 2 battle-worn soldiers. It was enough. Later that week, I stood in front of my mirror, running a brush through my hair. The same mirror I used to avoid because I didn't like the story it told. Of aging, fading, softening. But now I saw strength. Not the kind that lifts weights or wins arguments. The kind that stays upright when the whole world tells you to sit down. So if you're reading this, or hearing it, wondering whether it's appropriate to want connection, affection, intimacy after 70, let me save you some time. Yes, it is. Not because you have something to prove, but because you have something to claim. Your life is not a waiting room. Your body is not an apology. And your age is not a permission slip to be erased. Franklin and I still go on walks, still hold hands, still kiss like we mean it. Not because it's scandalous, but because it's sacred. I don't know how long we have left. No one does. But I do know this. I will not spend another day pretending I am less than whole. Because this isn't shame. This is freedom. This is joy. This is what intimacy really looks like. After 70, after grief, after silence. This is me. Thank you for staying through the entire story. If it moved you, share it. Someone out there needs to hear this more than you know.